Hidden beneath the vast canopy is a lost world of the ancient Maya.
It might be a new discovery, but archaeologists have uncovered the remains of a nearly 3,000-year-old city.
It's transforming our understanding of one of history's most mysterious civilizations, the Maya.
40 feet beneath the Guatemalan jungle, archaeologists opened a sealed doorway untouched for 12,000 years.
Hidden beneath this dense jungle lies the remnants of an advanced civilization. Archaeologists believe this find will help unlock more mysteries of the Mayan.
And found no treasure, no kings, only 3 human bodies seated in perfect stillness inside a chamber that devoured light itself. The real discovery came later in a genetics lab when scientists uncovered a precise mathematical code hidden in the DNA of those ancient remains. A sequence that matched symbols carved into the walls and still exists, dormant, in people alive today. But what does it mean when a code from 12,000 years ago is still alive in us today? This isn't a story about the Maya, who came much later.
The Maya. They're considered one of the most advanced civilizations to have existed in the Americas before the Spanish conquest.
It's about what existed before civilization, about a machine buried in the jungle that's still running, and about a genetic signature that points to a star system 1,500 light-years away. This is Sequence X473, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why some secrets were meant to stay buried. The Obsidian Chamber. It started in the Petén Basin of northern Guatemala, one of the thickest, most impenetrable stretches of jungle on Earth. This is the heartland of the ancient Maya, a landscape dotted with thousands of ruins.
The Petén Basin in the Selva Maya, the Maya Forest. The ruins of the ancient Mayan city of Tikal.
Most of them still swallowed by vegetation, unexplored, unknown. A research team was conducting routine restoration work near El Mirador, one of the largest Maya cities ever discovered. They were scanning the foundations of collapsed temples with ground-penetrating radar, looking for structural weaknesses, mapping what remained of a civilization that vanished 1,000 years ago.
Beneath this jungle canopy, for the very first time, allowing experts to create a treasure map of a lost world.
The radar showed something strange, a void beneath the pyramid's base. Not unusual. The Maya built over older structures all the time. But this void was different. It was geometric, perfectly circular, and it was deep, more than 40 feet below the foundation, far deeper than any known Maya construction in the area. Nature doesn't build in perfect circles. The team assumed it was a collapsed cenote, a natural sinkhole. They started digging to assess the structural risk to the pyramid above. What they found instead was a layer of stone blocks, unlike anything they'd seen before.
Inside the pit, ancient capstones are protecting a cavity that could contain a precious burial.
The blocks were smooth, cut with a precision that seemed almost mechanical. They were bound together by an andesite compound that laboratory analysis would later confirm was harder than modern Portland cement. The composition didn't match any known Maya construction material. It didn't match anything from the pre-Columbian Americas at all. As the excavation continued, instruments began malfunctioning. Compass needles drifted. Electronic equipment glitched. The stone itself seemed to be emitting a faint magnetic field, as if there was metal embedded somewhere inside. After weeks of careful work, they reached a sealed doorway. A single massive slab of limestone fitted so precisely into its frame that not even jungle roots had penetrated the seal. The surface bore engravings, but they weren't Maya glyphs. Some resembled pre-Olmec iconography.
Have you heard of the Olmec Empire? Their civilization existed between 1200 to 400 BC, and were the precursors to later cultures, such as the Maya and Zapotec empires.
The oldest known artistic tradition in Mesoamerica. Others looked like nothing anyone on the team had ever seen. spiral patterns, star-like formations, geometric shapes that seemed to vibrate if you stared at them too long. The team photographed everything, documented everything, and then they breached the seal. A hiss of compressed air escaped from darkness that hadn't been disturbed in millennia. The chamber beyond was circular, roughly 23 feet across. But what stopped the archaeologists cold wasn't the shape. It was the walls. They were coated in a black glass-like substance that resembled obsidian, but behaved like nothing natural. Light from their equipment didn't reflect off this material. It was absorbed, swallowed. The chamber was several degrees colder than the jungle outside, and the silence was absolute. Not the ordinary silence of underground spaces, but something deeper, something that felt intentional. In the center of the chamber, arranged on 3 low stone pedestals, sat the remains of 3 individuals. They were positioned cross-legged, facing inward, surrounded by jade ornaments, polished metallic discs, and fragments of quartz crystal. The preservation was impossible. In tropical humidity like this, organic material should decay within decades. These remains looked like they had been sealed yesterday, but the bodies themselves were the real anomaly. Their skulls were elongated, dramatically so. The Maya practiced artificial cranial modification, binding the heads of infants to create elongated shapes. But examination of these skulls revealed something different.
Large human skulls and skeletons that measured between 7 and 8 feet in height, which, for ancient man, would have been rather significant.
The bone density was uniform. The symmetry was perfect. This wasn't the result of binding. This was how they were born. The team extracted organic samples for dating. When the results came back, the laboratory requested retesting, certain there had been an error. The samples dated to approximately 12,400 years before present. These remains were older than the Maya civilization by 8,000 years. They were older than the Olmec by 10,000 years. They were from a time before any known civilization existed in the Americas, before agriculture, before pottery, before written language. And someone had built this chamber, sealed these bodies inside, and encoded symbols into the walls that wouldn't be carved anywhere else for another 100 centuries. The impossible code. The remains were transported to a genetics laboratory for DNA analysis. The initial results were unremarkable. Mitochondrial DNA placed the individuals within haplogroup A2, one of the founding lineages of indigenous American populations. So far, so normal. But when researchers attempted deeper genomic sequencing, the analysis failed. Specific regions of the genome wouldn't align with any known human reference data. They assumed contamination. Ancient DNA is notoriously fragile and easily corrupted by modern genetic material. They re-extracted samples. They ran the sequencing again. The anomaly persisted, and it was identical across all 3 individuals. The problem was in the non-coding regions of the genome, the sections that don't produce proteins, the parts that scientists once dismissed as junk DNA.
A journey through the dark matter of the human genome. We are really complex organisms, and yet there's a tiny microscopic worm that does almost nothing.
Hidden in these stretches was a repeating sequence, a patterned motif, so precise it couldn't be random. It wasn't a mutation. It wasn't genetic drift. When the team mapped the pattern mathematically, they found something that made the lead geneticist leave the room. The sequence followed the Fibonacci progression, the mathematical ratio that governs the spiral of seashells, the branching of trees, the structure of galaxies. It was encoded in the DNA of 3 individuals who died 12,000 years ago. They designated the anomaly Sequence X473. It was unlike anything in any genetic database on Earth. It was human, mostly, but it contained insertions, additions that didn't evolve naturally, that looked for all the world like they had been placed there deliberately. The senior geneticist proposed a hypothesis that was immediately flagged and classified. The sequence wasn't biological information at all. it was data storage. The DNA was functioning as a molecular hard drive, carrying encoded information that had nothing to do with building proteins or regulating cellular function. When they translated the anomalous segments into binary code, the output produced repeating numerical constants. These constants corresponded to precise astronomical ratios, specifically the orbital relationship between Venus and Earth. The same astronomical cycles that would become central to Maya cosmology 8,000 years later. But these bodies predated the Maya by millennia. Someone had encoded astronomical knowledge into the genetic material of 3 people and then sealed them in a chamber designed to last forever. The bodies weren't just remains, they were archives. Living libraries preserved in genetic code, waiting to be read. Parallel testing at another university revealed something even stranger. Sequence X473 wasn't dormant. Under ultraviolet light, the DNA strands emitted faint biophotonic activity. They glowed. The wavelength matched certain bioluminescent marine organisms, creatures that live in the deepest parts of the ocean. Why would ancient human remains from a jungle chamber contain genetic material that behaves like deep-sea life? The team had no answer, but then someone made the connection that tied everything together. Back at the dig site, researchers were enhancing the images of the glyphs carved into the chamber door, the spiral patterns, the star formations. They sent high-resolution scans to the genetics lab for comparison. The geometric configurations of the base pairs in Sequence X473, the actual physical structure of the DNA, perfectly mirrored the spiral glyphs on the stone. The builders of this chamber hadn't just known about genetics. They had encoded their sacred symbols into the biology of the people they buried. 12,000 years ago, someone in this jungle understood genetic engineering at a level we're only beginning to approach today, and they left a message written in the one medium guaranteed to survive: human DNA. Guardians of the old blood. The geneticists ran one more test. A long shot. They compared Sequence X473 against modern population databases, expecting nothing. The sequence was 12,000 years old. It should have been diluted out of existence by millennia of genetic mixing. The database returned a match. Low frequency, degraded, but unmistakable. The sequence wasn't extinct. It was still here. The samples came from isolated highland communities in the Yucatan Peninsula, small villages in difficult terrain, far from major cities, populations that had maintained ancient customs and oral traditions for centuries. Teams were dispatched immediately. New DNA tests confirmed the impossible. Faint traces of Sequence X473 persisted in a small percentage of individuals in these communities. The bloodline hadn't died. It had been protected. Medically, the sequence seemed to influence cellular behavior in subtle but measurable ways. Cells containing X473 showed accelerated tissue repair. Neural activity in memory-related regions was unusually high. These communities had, for generations, demonstrated inexplicably strong immunity to certain infections. Something in their genetics was different, and it had been different for a very long time. But the cultural evidence was the real revelation. Anthropologists interviewing village elders heard phrases that sent chills through the research team. The elders spoke of being guardians of the old blood. Their oral histories, passed down for hundreds of generations, warned against intermarriage with outsiders, not from prejudice, they insisted, but to prevent a loss of balance. They were unknowingly describing genetic preservation. They were protecting a sequence they didn't know they carried. When researchers showed the elders enhanced images of the spiral glyphs from the 12,000-year-old chamber, several recognized them immediately. They called the pattern the breath of the sky. This wasn't mythology invented in isolation. This was genetic memory, stories that had survived since before the last ice age, passed from parent to child for 400 generations, describing a truth the storytellers themselves no longer understood. Broader analysis found micro-fragments of the sequence scattered across the globe, trace amounts in South Pacific Islanders, faint signatures in northern Andean populations, whispers of it in certain Arctic groups. The sequence didn't follow normal patterns of genetic inheritance. It didn't have a common ancestor that population geneticists could trace. It hadn't evolved from anything. It appeared simultaneously in populations separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. It looked exactly like what the senior geneticist had feared: an insertion, an intentional addition, a piece of code deliberately placed into human populations across the planet by someone who understood genetics 12 millennia before Watson and Crick. The machine that still hums. While the geneticists were unraveling impossible codes hidden in ancient DNA, something else was happening in the jungle. The remote sensing teams had expanded their survey radius.
Deep in the Central American jungle, the trees are hiding treasures. Radar fired from a plane peers through the canopy to search for ruins. This is in Guatemala.
Scanning the terrain around the original chamber site. They were looking for additional burial sites, collapsed structures, anything that might explain what they had found beneath that pyramid. What they discovered instead was something that shouldn't exist at all. The instruments detected a second anomaly approximately 2 miles from the obsidian chamber. At first, the readings made no sense. The shape was too perfect, too symmetrical. Hidden beneath thick jungle canopy, buried under layers of volcanic ash and limestone sediment that had accumulated over millennia, was a ring. A massive, geometrically precise circle measuring 300 feet across. This wasn't erosion. This wasn't a cenote or a collapsed cave system. The edges were too clean, the proportions too exact. Something had been built here, something enormous, and the jungle had spent 12,000 years trying to swallow it. The excavation team began extracting core samples. When the material analysis came back from the laboratory, the project director reportedly sat in silence for 10 minutes before speaking. The ring structure was composed of alloy metals: titanium, vanadium, iridium. These aren't materials you dig out of the ground and hammer into shape. Titanium requires processing temperatures exceeding 1,600 degrees Celsius. Vanadium needs specialized reduction techniques. Iridium is one of the rarest elements on Earth, found primarily in asteroid impact sites and deep within the planet's core. No pre-industrial society could work with these metals. Most modern facilities would struggle to process them at this scale. The surrounding geological layers told an even stranger story. The volcanic glass encasing the structure was fused with metallic particles, evidence of exposure to temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Celsius. Whatever event created this site didn't just build the ring, it scorched the earth around it. The heat signature was consistent with either advanced metallurgical processing or something far more energetic. The team began referring to the site as the Foundry, though no one was comfortable with what that implied. And then the magnetometers picked up something that changed everything. The ring was active, not residually charged, not geologically unstable, actively emitting a signal. Low-frequency electromagnetic pulses were radiating from the structure in a pattern so regular it couldn't be natural. The pulse repeated every 11 minutes, precise to the fraction of a second, like a heartbeat that had been beating since before the pyramids were conceived. The equipment operators initially assumed instrument malfunction. They recalibrated. They brought in backup sensors. The pulse continued. Steady, patient, unwavering. Something buried in this jungle had been running for 12,000 years, and it showed no signs of stopping. The team attempted to map the pulse pattern, converting the electromagnetic frequency into numerical values. When they compared the mathematical ratio to their other data sets, the room went silent. The pulse signature matched Sequence X473 exactly. The same mathematical constants, the same Fibonacci-derived ratios, the same impossible precision. The machine in the ground and the code in human DNA were resonating at identical frequencies. They weren't just similar, they were synchronized. Two components of a single system, separated by miles of jungle and millennia of human ignorance, still communicating with each other. The implications hit the research team like a physical force. This structure wasn't a monument or a temple or a tomb. It was technology. Technology that was still operational. Technology that appeared to be transmitting to, or receiving from, a genetic sequence carried by living people. The guardians of the old blood, those isolated highland communities who had protected their lineage for 400 generations, weren't just preserving ancestry. They were maintaining a connection, a link to hardware that had been waiting in the darkness since before human civilization began. The theories multiplied, and none of them brought comfort. Was the machine simply communicating with the DNA, sending status updates, confirming the sequence remained intact? Or was it doing something more active, powering the genetic code somehow, keeping it viable across centuries when normal genetic drift should have diluted it into nothing? Some researchers proposed that the carriers of Sequence X473 were functioning as a distributed biological network, their bodies unknowingly serving as nodes in a system designed to keep this ancient technology on standby. A living power grid. A human battery array scattered across continents, connected by blood to a machine they would never see. But the most disturbing theory came from the signals analysis team. They noted that the pulse wasn't just broadcasting, it was modulating. Subtle variations in frequency that occurred on longer cycles, patterns within patterns that suggested the signal wasn't static. It was adaptive. It was waiting for something. And if it was waiting, that meant it was programmed to respond. The electromagnetic pulse wasn't just communication, it might be instruction, a command encoded in frequencies that human ears couldn't hear, transmitted to genetic material that human science had only just discovered, telling that ancient code to do something, to change, to activate, to finally execute. Whatever program had been written into it 12,000 years ago. The team requested permission to excavate deeper, to physically access the ring's structure and examine its internal mechanisms. That request was denied. Not by the university, not by the Guatemalan government. The denial came from somewhere higher, somewhere that doesn't appear on organizational charts. The site was quietly classified. A perimeter was established. Official reports were edited. The machine that had hummed for 12 millennia would continue humming, monitored but untouched, its purpose unknown, its builders unidentified, its signals still pulsing into the blood of people who have no idea what they're carrying. Every 11 minutes, like clockwork. Waiting. The Sky River. The final piece came from an artifact recovered in the original chamber, a fractured jade tablet covered in glyphs. Translation took months. What emerged was a star map, but not of the current night sky. It showed the heavens as they appeared exactly 12,000 years ago. That date should mean something to you. 12,000 years ago marks the Younger Dryas, a period of catastrophic climate change that may have been triggered by a comet impact or massive solar event. It was an extinction-level moment, a global cataclysm that wiped the slate clean and plunged the world into a final brutal ice age. Whatever civilization existed before that moment, and something clearly did, was erased. The star map pointed to the Pleiades, the star cluster that would become central to Maya astronomy thousands of years later. But it also indicated a second location, a spiral path connecting our solar system to a dense region of interstellar dust in the Taurus constellation, approximately 1,500 light-years away. The tablet called this location Chaibalha, the Sky River. The glyphs described it not as a destination, but as a corridor, a passage, a stable pathway through the cosmos. The text referenced this Sky River in conjunction with symbols for arrival, teaching, and blood. It spoke of the Baalam Chan, those who came in light, the sky people. Put the pieces together. 12,000 years ago, as the world burned and froze and civilizations collapsed, something arrived. Not from the Taurus constellation, but through it, using the Sky River as a transit corridor. They found a planet on the brink of total collapse. They couldn't save everyone, but maybe they could save something. The hypothesis that emerged, and understand this is the interpretation that got the project classified, is that these visitors weren't just teachers or gods or interdimensional travelers. They were genetic engineers. They built the 300-foot ring structure, this beacon, this trigger buried in the jungle. They edited the DNA of survivors, inserting Sequence X473 into their genome. They created a bloodline designed to persist across millennia, carrying encoded information in their very cells. They made humans into living data storage, biological custodians for a technology they couldn't take with them. And then they left. The system went dormant. The machine powered down to a whisper. The Guardians forgot what they were guarding. The stories became mythology. The science became magic. 12,000 years passed, and now we've found it. The chamber, the bodies, the DNA, the machine, the signal that's still pulsing every 11 minutes, broadcasting to genetic material scattered across the globe, waiting for something. The question that keeps the research team awake at night isn't where this technology came from. It's what happens when the sequence fully activates. What happens when the dormant code in the blood of the Guardians finally receives the signal it's been waiting 12 millennia to hear? What happens when the Sky People, or whatever they actually were, decide it's time to check on their experiment? The machine is still running, the signal is still pulsing, and the sequence is still alive, circulating quietly in the blood of people who have no idea they carry it. Whatever was put in place 12,000 years ago was never meant to end quickly. It was meant to endure, to wait, to outlast civilizations, belief systems, even memory itself. The question is no longer whether something was started in the deep past, but why it hasn't finished yet. What is the system waiting for? Alignment, activation, contact. And when the signal finally changes, when the pulse stops or the sequence awakens, will we recognize it as a warning or as an invitation? Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the most important discoveries don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves slowly, until one day it's too late to look away.